I can't tell you how often this happens. Out in the car with a driver, it used to happen a lot as a real estate officer when we were on tour of property. And we'd be driving along the street and the driver would slow down, point to a property and say, "You see that house over there? I used to own that. Worst mistake I ever made was to sell it." It's amazing how often that conversation repeats itself. Last week I was speaking to one of my salespeople and he was telling me about a plaza he used to own. And he said, "Worst mistake I ever made," it's like it's scripted, "was to sell that plaza." I'm another salesperson of mine who certainly believes in investment in real estate, bought a multi-unit apartment building, and again, decided at one point in time for a number of reasons to sell the property. I spoke to him maybe a year or two later, exactly the same thing. Worst mistake I ever made. So what prompts it? If they recognize after that's the worst mistake, why do we do it? Why do we sell these properties? I believe in my Money Machine seminar, I espouse the idea of being in it for the long haul. What happens is this. Over time, the property goes up in value. And certainly over the last few years, most properties have gone up a lot in value. At the same time, the mortgages have been being paid on a monthly basis, and a portion of each of that payments is discharging the principal. So the spread between what the property is worth and the debt on the property gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and the owner sees all the equity they've got tied up in that property. And then along comes a problem tenant. It's like a stone in your shoe. All you can think about is the pain from the stone in that shoe, and you want to stop the pain. It might be a duplex or a triplex, and two of the tenants and two of the units are fighting. And each time they get in a fight, one or the other one calls you. You're the referee. You don't want to be the referee, but you've just been brought into it. Or it might be a tenant who just by nature is a problem tenant. I had a tenant would have been fine, but she had her granddaughter over there all the time, and the granddaughter was a drug addict, and her friends were drug addicts, and it was just deteriorating and causing all kinds of problems. And you can have a tenant that's not paying their rent, or that's not looking after the property. There's a whole host of things that we as landlords can run into that cause the pain. And we just want to make the pain stop. And we can make the pain stop by selling the property. And we realize, gee, all this equity I've got built up, I'll be able to get my hands on it. So we sell the property, the pain goes away, we grab all this money, and we think, gosh, what a great, great decision that was. But it isn't too long till the money's gone. We either increase our lifestyle, we go on a bunch of holidays, you buy a Maserati, you do something, and the money's gone. Now you have no money, and you have no investment property. And that's unfortunate. And there's things you can do to insulate yourself from that happening. I just want to touch on a couple of them now, if I may. One of the first things and most important things I tell people over and over again is to delegate as much of the hands-on chores in landlord ownership of a property as you possibly can. I say, if you are a plumber and you own an investment property and a tenant calls you to say a tap is dripping, call the plumber. Don't be the plumber. And I always get resistance from that. Well, I can fix it myself. I wouldn't want to pay it. But the thing is, if you go over once, that's fine. In fact, you're maybe kind of proud that you did it and saved yourself this money. The second call, you do it. After a while, you get tired of getting the calls. And then you don't want to go any longer. Realize that even when you are spending money for jobs you could do yourself, it's before tax dollars, not after tax dollars. You can write it off. So it's only costing you half what it seems like it's costing you. But the thing is that you're getting it more and more like an investment and less like a hands-on job that you're doing. And you're going to feel much less stressed out about being the landlord. The second thing that's hugely important is how we screen for tenants. Take your time. It's far better to carry the unit vacant for a month than get somebody in there that you wish you didn't. So when a prospective tenant looks at the unit, have them fill out an application form. Even if they seem like a great tenant, don't make a commitment to rent to them on the spot. Now go over that application form very carefully. And there's some key things you're looking for. The first thing you want to look at is past rental history. Have they moved every 6 or 7 months? If they have, don't rent to them. If you're talking to them about it and you say, well, I'm sorry, I'm looking for somebody long-term. Oh, no, I'm going to be long-term. Yeah, but you moved every 6 or 7 months. Yeah, well, that was because of this and that was because of that. No, I want something long-term. Don't rent to them. They've developed a lifestyle of moving every 6 or 7 months, and they will with you as well. So avoid that. If you go through and you see some significant gaps where they were telling you here, but then there was 4 or 5 years or 3 years missing, and then here, zero down on that. Find out what's going on. It may be that they're out of the area to live with their parents. It might be a valid reason, but it also may be a bad experience to have with the landlord, and they don't want you to be talking to that landlord. So spend some time reviewing that. And then you want to make sure, as much as you can, that they are who they say they are, and the landlord who they give you is who the actual landlord is. Do some review on documentation, find out who the owner of the property is, check it against the address they give you, and make sure that's where they were living and that's the actual landlord. And then you want to speak to the current landlord, and you want to speak to the past landlord. It may be the tenant will tell you, well, the reason I moved here was because the landlord was terrible, didn't look after anything, didn't return, the place was a mess, and so on. Well, that's quite possibly true, but it's also possible that the tenant was the problem. And if you speak to 2 or 3 landlords and you find out that there's a series of these things, it's probably the tenant, probably not the landlord. You need to do your homework on that one. What do you do if they own their own property and they weren't renting? Maybe it's a marriage breakup and they're splitting up. Well, one thing I found is if the house is sold and they're moving in, they don't have that rental history, I want to speak to the real estate agent who handled the sale. How are they to work with? What was the property like? Did it show well? Was it well looked after or not? And on occasions, I've had them where I want to call for a reference, and it's a holding company, and all they'll tell me is they paid the rent. They don't want the liability of saying anything good or bad. So I'll ask the tenant if they'd mind if I come and have a look at where they live. And that'll tell me a lot about what they're going to be like. My point is that you want to take your time, do your homework. Nothing's foolproof, but as best you can, try and find out whether or not this is the type of tenant that you want before you make a commitment to them. And then I want to say that nothing's 100% foolproof. You can reduce the odds of getting a bad tenant. You can do your homework. You can do everything you can to check, but you're going to, from time to time, run into a tenant that's high maintenance or a problem. The verse of scripture in the Bible, in Proverbs, says, "Where no oxen are, the crib is clean, but much increases from the strength of the ox." And what they're saying is if you want a squeaky clean barn, don't have cows or sheep or pigs or horses in there. But if you want to make a profit, you're going to have to shovel the stalls out from time to time. And that's the same thing as being a landlord. If you don't want to ever have problems, don't have tenants. But if you want to build up equity and see positive cash flow, well, from time to time, you're going to have to muck out a few stalls. I want to thank you very much for investing your time watching this video. I look forward to talking to you again next week.